Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Well, welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Today's guest is super impressive, and I'm excited to introduce him. He's an entrepreneur, endurance athlete, author, and speaker, completed 17 Ironman triathlon, and recently cycled from New York City to Niagara Falls, raising millions for cancer research. He is determined to conquer all 7 summits with Mount Everest for the spring of 2025. He is the author of Amazon best-selling book, Built to Finish. Please welcome Steve Pivnik. Steve, welcome to the show.
Greg, thank you for having me.
It's we have a lot to dig into, but as you know, we love talking about the endurance mindset. So, Steve, how has your endurance mindset impacted your life unexpectedly?
Yeah, I guess I like to call it the grind, right? Endurance has a lot to do with the grind, and I'm a child of immigrants. We were we came over to the United States from the former Soviet Union in the early '70s, and I just witnessed my parents and my grandparents just grind it out, day in and day out. And I think you learn the grind by witnessing the grind. Grind synonymous with endurance, and they impacted me tremendously. And I've utilized that skill throughout my entire career and continue to do so.
Yeah, that's so well said. I'd love to go a little bit deeper. Can you give us a specific example of when that sort of presented itself, that ability to grind?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different chapters of my corporate career. Ever since I started my company. Well, actually, there was two failures before the success, right? So there was some grinding, which didn't result in much, and then the third time was a charm. And just like with many other entrepreneurial journeys, there was a decent amount of success, and there was continuous failures and setbacks. And when we were hit with those, we had two choices, call it quits or to, hunker down and continue at it. Thank God we chose to hunker down and continue at it because it eventually paid off.
Were the 2 failures similar businesses, or did you almost go in completely different directions when you had one idea and you got it off the ground and then it didn't work out? Walk us through that progression.
Sure. They were in a similar space. They were both in IT. The first one was just a services business, right? So I just made the decision that I didn't want to work for a boss anymore, and I was bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, and I just wanted to work for myself. The company was kind of visionless and didn't have much direction other than trading time for dollars, right?
Mhm.
So that really, and I'm actually I think I have it up there somewhere. There was an ad in the New York Times. We basically said, if you're tired of paying inflated consulting rates, come, call us. And we literally waited by the phone all day, every day for the phone to ring because there were no cell phones, right? There was no email. So that company was kind of directionless and went nowhere. The second one wasn't, too dissimilar. And the third time, there was a little bit more of a strategy and direction to it. And that actually ended up working.
Yeah, let's jump into that, because so many of us start this entrepreneurial career journey because we're good at something and somebody wants us to do it.
Right.
And we ultimately, to your point, trade time for dollars. And we are kind of directionless, right? And I've had previous businesses that I had the same challenge. It's just like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, yay me, right? Um, but I'd love to know, when did a light bulb come on for you to develop the strategy to think bigger, to do some planning when you came to that third business?
Yeah, but by the time I started the third one, I was surrounded with more, experienced folks that knew what they were doing, and our strategy was relatively simple at the time. We said, you know what, instead of providing services to the customer community in Manhattan at the time, let's form a company and provide services as a group, as an organization, as multiple individuals instead of one on one. And
Mhm.
we felt that if we were to study and get up to speed on the latest and greatest technology, because this was like in the early 90s. Technology was evolving really, really quickly. We felt that, we could command the highest billing rates as a company and as a group versus individuals. So what made the biggest difference was the fact that, I had surrounded myself with others, and together it felt like we could make a difference and give it like a real go at it versus individually.
That's a great story. So how did you find those other individuals to be part of this group?
We just found, so as an independent contractor at the time, I found myself on a project at JP Morgan writing a
Mhm.
foreign exchange trading application. And JP Morgan hired a whole bunch of other contractors, for the same project because it was a pretty big project. So obviously, not that there were multiple camps, but there was the employee camp and then there was the contractor camp, right? Because we were in the contractor room. We didn't have our own office. We didn't have our own cubicles. We were just in that contractor, bullpen. And I befriended a whole bunch of them and said, "Hey guys, here's my strategy. Let's get together. Let's pool some resources. And if we get up to speed on the latest and greatest technology, we can make a name for ourselves here."
Okay, we're gonna dig into that a lot more a little bit further down the show. I wanna flip, the conversation back to endurance and racing. As I introed you, 17 Ironman, 7 summits. When did that bug sort of start in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I love this story because I consider this my midlife crisis, right? So as I was approaching 40, I felt that I had inherited some pretty bad genes. Between my grandparents and parents, they had it all. High blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, strokes, you name it, they had it. That meant that it was in here somewhere, and I felt that not that I was in bad shape per se, but I wasn't I was nowhere near, athletic or in great shape. I felt that I really needed to get into good shape so that if and when those diseases hit me, I would be, better equipped to fight
Mm.
them. And coincidentally, I found out about this thing called triathlon and I pursued it, and it became not only a hobby, but just an addiction of mine.
So jumping into triathlon and then doing 17 Ironman races is a pretty long spectrum of endurance. I Walk us through that story. Like, when did you start with a sprint and then go to Olympic, and then all of a sudden it was showtime, or did you just know from the beginning that, hey, I want to go full distance triathlon?
So I learned about a triathlon period. I always thought that this was like this elite endurance event that only that mere mortals cannot participate in. I thought it was only available in the Olympics. An employee of mine educated me on the fact that mere mortals can go to a website and sign up for a race. So it started with a sprint. I finished the sprint at just a weekend after my 40th birthday, and I emailed her, thanking her for her encouragement, her support, etc. And she responded with, "Congratulations. I knew you can do it. I'm sure we'll see you in Kona one day." And I didn't know what that meant. So I Googled Kona triathlon, and up came all of these Ironman inspirational, motivational videos. And this light bulb went off in my head. I said to myself, I don't know how, I don't know when, but I'm going to become an Ironman and I'm going to compete at the world championship in Hawaii one day. So the journey started that evening.
And if I read your background right, you have done world championship. What year was that?
So I finally got into Kona and I competed in 2022.
So let's shift gears a little bit. Still in the endurance conversation, why the 7 summits?
Right. So I mean, I've always liked the outdoors. And in my company, we did a lot of work with Microsoft. Working with Microsoft required a lot of trips out to the West Coast. One specific trip required me to be there for a meeting on Friday and on a Monday. And I felt it would be a waste of time to fly all the way back to the East Coast just to come back again for a Monday meeting. So I decided to kill the weekend in Washington State. And I asked somebody about, activities that I can do. And somebody suggested that I go hiking on Mount Rainier.
Hmm.
And I went out to my Mount Rainier, which was the most incredible experience. It's like this majestic mountain. It's one of the tallest, in the continental US. And it has, totally, glaciated peaks, very, very alpine-like conditions. And I just fell in love with it. And I said, somehow, I love the comment some way, somehow, because I say that often. I'm like, okay, My next goal is to sign up for a climbing class so that I can get to the summit of this thing. I did that a month later, loved the experience, and I said, okay, so this is mountaineering. This is what it's all about. Now it's time to go after the big boys. And I started pursuing the seven summits goal.
Wow, that's a very, very impressive. Um, Curious, Steve, as you were knocking down these Ironman races, was that around the same time that you were building this business as well?
Yeah, it was at the exact same time. And I like to say that entrepreneurship is an endurance sport. There's so many similarities, and success in one or participation in one really fuels success in the other. Between, planning, preparation, execution, pivots, setbacks, stamina, the list goes on and on in terms of similarities. And when you're knee deep in one, you can't help but reach for the memories of the other and to say, "Hey, you know what? I can't make payroll next month, but you know what? I also thought that I couldn't make it to the finish line of that race, and somehow, some way, I made it to that finish line. Therefore, some way, somehow, I'm going to make payroll next month." And the two feed on each other.
100%. In fact, I did my first Ironman race in Lake Placid 10 years ago when I was taking my company through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process, and
Oh wow.
it was hand in hand, right? Like getting that hard workout in the morning before going to the office to deal with what you have to deal with, it just made the day easier.
Yep.
Um, so, I've been reading through your book. I'd love to talk to you, one, about uh, the inspiration for the book, and then let's e- educate the audience on some of the context. I think you are also drawing a lot of similarities between endurance racing and business life throughout the book. We don't want to spoil the ending, but give us some insight. Like, when did you know that you had a book inside you?
You know what? I really never thought of having a book inside me. I love to blog about my adventures, whether it's mountaineering adventures or some of these crazy races that I participated in. And a good friend of mine, every single time I posted a blog entry, he's like, "You have to write a book. You have to," because he saw these blog entries, accumulating, all of them with, inspirational, motivational stories. And he just, kept chirping in my ear, "You have to write a book. You have to write a book. You have to write a book." When COVID was finally ending and I went to and trade shows started coming, back into play, I heard Ed Viesturs up on stage. Ed Viesturs' claim to fame is he has summited not only the 7 summits, but all of the highest peaks in Asia without supplemental oxygen, all 14 of them, all 14 8,000-meter peaks. And I loved seeing his inspirational story on stage, and when he finished his story, he pitched his book. So, I just put 2 and 2 together. I said, "You know what? I wanna share my story. I want to inspire others. In order to get credibility, I need to write a book." And right there and then, I said, "Okay, it's time to put all of my, blog entries," which I didn't. I took a different approach, but I said, "It's time to write a book so that I can get credibility to get on stage." And fortunately, it had a whole bunch of other, really great side effects, but that was the impetus.
So from that day until the publication date, what's that time frame?
Probably a year and a half. By the time I found the publisher, by the time I put all the pieces into play, it was a year and a half.
So my next question, as a wanting to be author, at least of another book, what did you come up with a writing process? Did you have a time management practice? Like, how did you actually sit down to get the words on paper?
Yeah, so one of my firm beliefs is the first time you attempt something new without expert guidance, your results are going to be suboptimal at best or a failure
Mm.
at worst, right? And I didn't want the results here to be suboptimal, so I hired a ghostwriter. I went through a pretty extensive interview process, and I interviewed probably a dozen different folks until I settled on one who I thought was going to be the best for this project. And the process went great. We met face to face for about 3 days. We came up with an outline, basically the chapter titles for the book after those 3 days. And then he interviewed me for an hour on each chapter. He went off, he wrote a chapter, sent it to me. I rewrote it to make it sound like me. And we went back and forth for 25, 26 chapters of the book and created the final product.
That's awesome. And it's very similar. So I published a book called The Turnaround about 10 years ago. And again, talking about Lake Placid training and the Chapter 11 bankruptcy process and what it was like to be inside a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process.
Sure.
And it was similar. I had a ghostwriter and we would spend time every week sort of talking about what the outline should look like, what the content should be. And then there was a final sort of rewrite. So, he got me 80% of the way there through interviews. And then ultimately we got to publication and then my mom bought a copy and that was my best-selling day. But, um, you know, as audience members are out there thinking about picking up the book. And again, I don't want to give away the read, but can you give us one or two insights or aha moments that come out of the pages?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest aha moment I had, which I cover in the book, is getting the right advisors, to help me with my journey. I when I finally decided that it was time to sell, fortunately, I realized that I don't have any sale experience in terms of company sale.
Mm,
And if there's any founders or entrepreneurs listening that are envisioning, some sort of sale of their company, the biggest piece of advice I can give them is please don't go at it alone. You're going to make mistakes. They're inevitable. You're not going to get the maximum valuation that you possibly can unless you surround yourself with people, both internally and externally, that have been there and done that, right? Because it's an art and a science to sell a company for maximum valuation. And if you don't be penny wise and pound foolish, because every penny you pay to an advisor is going to come back to you, fivefold from a valuation perspective.
that's really great advice, Steve. I'm curious about your insights on when's the right time for an entrepreneur, founder, business owner to start thinking about their exit and then ultimately engaging an expert. Give us a sense of what your recommendation is on timing.
Sure. There's, no two timings are the same for different people. There's some unfortunate events that happen, right? There could be, a sickness, an illness with one of the founders or partner. There could be a divorce. There can be, a drastic, market change that occurs. Those are all really unfortunate times to sell a company. Um, and from my I think the biggest driver should be a number, right? Everybody
Mm,
needs to know what their number is, and there's a whole methodology on finding this out, right? So it just in quick summary, there's a cascading waterfall model that founders should put together. Basically, you plug a number in at the top, which is the enterprise value of what you'll get for what you may potentially get for your company. And then there's a whole bunch of exits and proceeds from that number. Your lawyer fees, your accounting fees, your stock option holder fees, your partner fees. There's a
mm.
million and one expenses, and then Uncle Sam obviously, gets his cut, and then there's a number that comes down to the bottom. Now, that number is not enough because you need to have had multiple conversations with experienced wealth managers to see what that number can result in from a cash flow perspective back to you, right? So when all of these things align, then you can kind of work your way backwards to figuring out what that top line number is, and then with advisors and the right management team, you could put a plan into place to actually achieve that sort of valuation. So that's a really long answer, but knowing the number is super, super important because at the end of the day, everybody wants $1 billion for their company. Nobody's going to get it, but knowing that number is key into putting the right plan in place.
Yeah, and you ultimately get the response of, "But I've worked so hard." And that doesn't drive valuation, does it?
That doesn't drive valuation in any way, shape, or form, and it's an incredibly emotional process when, bidders for your company or potential suitors are giving you a number and it just doesn't jive with you emotionally. But at the end of the day, these are all 99% are just, financial decisions that buyers are making, whether it's a strategic acquirer or a private equity acquirer. It's all based on numbers. You can think that you have the best thing since sliced bread. Your numbers for the most part, are going to dictate what your valuation is.
100%. Stephen, in your book, you talk about DNFs, do not finish. And as they're not failures, they're really kind of opportunities to learn. I see similarities on that exit strategy along with endurance training. So walk us through that comparison. Like your exit took X amount of time from the day that you guys decided to sell to when you ultimately sold. Relate that to training for a summit or training for an Ironman race.
Sure. I mean, they're both long hauls, right? So, like for instance, an Ironman race takes. There's always exceptions, right? But for the most part, it's a 6 to 8 month training process with training weeks of 10 to 15, sometimes 20-hour weeks, in order to get yourself mentally and physically prepared to get to get to the starting line and then to get to the finish line. It's very, very similar with an exit process. There's a myriad of things that need to be organized in order for a company to get a maximum valuation, starting with corporate governance and making sure that you've got a process in place to close your books um, continuous religiously and professionally on a very, very punctual basis, to the management team that you need to have in place, to all the contracts that you need to have, organized, to making sure that you have as much recurring revenue as possible, et cetera. There's the list goes on and on and on and on. And these things don't happen overnight, right? So if you get the proper advisor, and he or she starts helping you, plan out this process, it's typically based on the experience I have with advising others. It's a 3-year process, plus or minus, a couple of quarters from the time you engage with a professional advisor to the time you actually have all of your ducks in a row with a pretty bow on it, so that you can take your company to market and get the best possible outcome.
And then you're sitting there with your fingers crossed, hoping that the market's ready for your business, right? It's two different timing cycles. It's their internal processes, getting your books in order, be ready for sale. And then also that there's a market out there, public, private, you name it.
Sure, and that's where, like, bringing in a very experienced investment banker that knows about your specific vertical is really important,
Mm.
because this is how investment bankers make their money. They understand exactly, what it takes to bring a company to market, and if you get the right one, and they're out there, they'll give you all the proper advice in terms of, when to take your company to market. So if market conditions aren't perfect, or if your internal conditions aren't perfect, they'll say, you know what? We need to do A, B, and C, or wait for X, Y, and Z before we bring your company to market. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are penny wise and pound foolish, because they look at the 7-figure price tag for an investment banker and they're like, I don't need that. I can sell my company on my own. And I think that's a foolish decision, because a good investment banker will get you, $2 to $3 million more for your company than you can by yourself, if not sometimes significantly more. And then their fee is definitely worth it.
That's 100% right. And I find that having a strong investment banking team takes a lot of the emotion out of the negotiation, right? If you're trying to run your business day to day and kind of keep the lights on while trying to sell your business, now you're doing two different things at the same time. And you're not going to be good at either.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress I can't stress how stressful that is, because you literally take on 2 full-time jobs. Selling a business is a full-time job. Obviously, running a business is a full-time job. And the last thing a founder should do is take their eye off the ball, because no deal is guaranteed until it's signed and the money's in the bank. I've had a deal, fall through in the 11th hour. Had I taken the eye off the ball from an operational perspective, we would have hurt, right? And there's nothing that kills a deal faster than having a bad quarter, right? Because sometimes due diligence, drags on and on and on, and you need to present your results month after month, quarter after quarter. Taking your eye off the ball is going to hurt tremendously. So it's going to be a double full time job for sure.
There's so many good nuggets there. I'm going to switch gears on you and talk about Everest and the training regimen you're going through. Now, you live in a city that doesn't have big peaks out the back door. So I'm curious, how do you train for an adventure and an endurance event like that?
Great question. So, I mean, fortunately, I've got a lot of foundation in here because I've done some of the other, 7 summits. So the body is used to, high altitudes and endurance. So right now, it's a ton of strength and conditioning exercises. So I'm just doing a ton of lower body workouts. So I've done more squats, lunges, and step ups in the last 4 months than I've done in my entire life combined. So I'm strengthening my lower body. I continue to do endurance workouts, so swimming, biking, and running.
Mm.
And I'm gonna start, getting out to the mountains to do some really long climbs and hikes with a heavy pack for, multiple hours on end to combine all of that, strength with endurance and high altitude in preparation for my trip in May.
I always have this memory of a gym that we belonged to back when we were living in DC, and you'd be there on the bike or on the treadmill, and there's always somebody next to you that's on the Stairmaster with a huge backpack on and these big boots, and you know that they're training for some sort of,
Yep.
uh, exhibition. Um, Steve, what do you so talk to us about what you're doing now, like, you sold your business a handful of years ago, you're obviously training for Everest. Are you still working? You got the book out. Like, give us a sense of what you're doing professionally.
Sure. So I'm really, really enjoying giving back to the entrepreneurial community. I benefited tremendously from advisors, especially during in the tail end of my, my last company. So I'm actually, helping other founders go through the same exact process. So again, it's typically like a 3-year project. My ideal customer is a founder that's been running their company for at least 10 years. It's at least $10 million, preferably, closer to 50, 10 to 50 million in annual revenue, and somebody that's actually, looking to finally realize the value of what they created through either a strategic exit or a private equity majority recapitalization. So I just actually just about literally a month ago just finished a sale of a client that I've been working with, and it was so rewarding to watch this entire process, go on and from the sidelines while helping the individual go through the process.
That's awesome. Do you specialize in any industry, or is it pretty agnostic?
I mean, my personal expertise lies in the IT industry, but because I've been in the advisory role for many years, even before I sold my company, I participated in CEO peer groups where we helped one another, go through various phases of growth. I have found that a lot of these challenges that entrepreneurs and founders have are industry agnostic. So sure, while if you wanted me to, to dive deep, well, I couldn't dive into code, but I can speak to IT better than I can speak to manufacturing. But at the end of the day, a lot of the challenges and initiatives that need to be put into place for a successful exit are very similar across the board.
And if I know you well enough now, you also do keynote speeches, and we've got a handful of entrepreneurs, business owners that listen to the podcast. That on a monthly, quarterly, whatever basis, we go to a retreat, or we go to a learning event, or we see a keynotes. Talk to us about what your presentation is, who's the right audience for it.
Sure. No, thank you for the opportunity. I love sharing my story on stage. I've done a lot of things right. I've done a lot of things wrong, and I've got a lot of interesting, inspirational, and motivational stories across the business realm and the endurance sports realm. So I intertwine a bunch of business lessons learned and advice with endurance sports, lessons learned and experiences. Leaving audiences entertained, be informed, and educated on how to set and achieve audacious goals.
Awesome. And if the audience member wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure. So my website has all of my social media handles. So my website is Steven Pivnik, StevenPivnik.com. Or you can reach me on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And we'll include those obviously in the show notes. So I've got to ask you one more question. So you're looking back at your younger self. What piece of advice would you give yourself for turning ideas into reality in the business world?
Yeah, the biggest piece of advice I would give myself is stop thinking that you know it all and get advice from others, right? Because a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, I was very guilty of this. I thought it was a weakness to get help, right? I know everything there is to know about this. Nobody can possibly help me. My situation is so unique. What can anybody possibly add to this? And that was so wrong. And I benefited tremendously when I finally came to the realization that I do need assistance and I do need mentorship and I do need advisors. I just wish I would have came to that realization sooner. I could have grown the company faster and had a, bigger exit had I done that sooner. I'm not complaining about the journey, lessons learned. It was a great ride, but it could have been different had I brought on advisors sooner.
So digging a little bit deeper into that, where did you find your advisors, mentors?
It just so, so there's 2 organizations that I can't speak highly enough of, and coincidentally, I work with both of them right now. So one of them is called the CEO Project. The CEO Project is a CEO peer group run by an executive coach. I joined the a group, and there was, 8 other members, and our meetings were facilitated by an executive coach, and the tagline for the CEO Project is, "This is where good CEOs become great." And
Mm,
because most CEOs, like I said earlier, really think that, their challenges are unique to them, that nobody else is facing these types of challenges, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And it was interesting that our group had CEOs from various different industries, and we all helped each other tremendously. So I can't speak highly enough about giving, founders advice to join a CEO peer group. So that's one. The other organization, which I'm also part of, is called Accresis. Accresis is a very boutique founder advisory firm, and we help founders that are committed to growing and selling their company. Our typical project is about 3 years, and we come in, we do an assessment on where the organization is right now in the context of an optimal exit, and we help the founder and the executive management team put all the necessary components into place to maximize that exit. So CEO project, more longer term coaching and improvement for the CEO. Accresis, much more shorter term march towards strategic sale.
and you're taking on projects with those groups, across the US?
Across the US, and Accresis is actually international. So we have
Mm.
two of the one of the founders is in the US, one of the founders is in the UK, and we have projects, across on both sides of the pond. And we're incredibly selective with clients there. And the CEO project is a larger organization. We have over 100 members, and there's multiple coaches across the entire United States. And if anybody's listening that wants more information on either of these, I'd be happy to share.
Fantastic, and we'll include those links in our show notes as well. Steve, any parting words for our audience?
I love the Ironman mantra, which I'm sure you're very well aware of. Anything is possible if you can dream it. It can happen. So set and achieve audacious goals because they are possible to achieve.
Steve, it's been awesome having you on the podcast today. Thank you for your insights, your entrepreneurial journey, your endurance journey, your book. There's just a lot of great content and information you're putting out into the universe. So thank you for that. Audience members, please subscribe to the show. Please share this episode with your friends. Like us, follow Steve on social media. Reach out if you need anything further from him. Again, Steve, it's been great having you on the show.
Greg, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits